So the court's striking down the sweeping tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump. Let's get more on this from Peter Mackay, former Minister of Foreign Affairs under Stephen Harper. Peter, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I know it's a moving
Always a pleasure, Andrew.
I know it's a moving target here. In fact, we weren't really in the crosshairs for these tariffs. I know Desjardins is saying that our taxes were previously under these tariffs about 3.7% import or levies. It only goes down to about 3.1%. But of course, it may have an impact on these CUSMA trade negotiations.
I think that's right. It's a major blow politically to the president and his administration, but its impact on Canada is negligible. And as you've noted, there's modest uptick in both the U.S. and Canadian markets. But in reality, there is no major impact here on things like lumber, steel, aluminum, auto parts. Those commodities will not be impacted by the Supreme Court striking down the president's use of IEEPA, this international emergency economic measure that he's been using as a cudgel to leverage other countries in trade negotiations through tariffs.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for reminding us that the levies on our steel and aluminum and some autos or auto parts still in place. And of course, Trump has made it clear he and his team were ready to use other tools here. We're not backing down on tariff.
Well, that's right. And that's what makes this decision, while significant, the president himself describing it as historic, most consequential, as he is prone to hyperbole. But there is already talk that they will find other means, legal or otherwise, to try to use tariffs. It is his favorite word, as he likes to remind us. And as you said, Andrew, this is perhaps, if nothing else, a bit of a psychological boost to Canadian negotiators, people like Dominic LeBlanc, who will be heading to Washington in June with the trade negotiator and our new U.S. ambassador, to take on the president and his team in these renegotiations of CUSMA, which are mandated and in fact mandatory after 6 years.
You must be amazed. You dealt with your U.S. counterparts during your years in government, in the cabinet. How strange are these times with such an aggressive tack taken against Canada on defense and trade by the White House?
Oh, look, Andrew, it's Twilight Zone. I mean, we've always had such a strong working relationship, positive relationship, whether it be on security matters, trade, most certainly, people to people, administration to administration. And look, I want to believe that goodwill does exist in many quarters. The president has changed the rules of the game, flipped the script, if you will. And it is a moment in time and one that Canada is going to have to negotiate carefully. The Prime Minister has promised that he's going to get a deal. That was his primary pitch to voters just less than a year ago. And so he's now in a position to deliver. And it has massive implications on the Canadian economy, let's be clear, not just in those sectors, but God forbid if we don't get this trade agreement secured. And the president has already mused that he may go to a bilateral agreement with Mexico and Canada. And so there's a lot at stake and a lot will be on the table in these negotiations.
And of course, you were Foreign Affairs Minister, but also Minister of Defense. And so, I mean, what do you when our nation is openly saying we're going to reduce our dependence on U.S. weapons systems, for example, it's really come to an amazing point.
Well, the uncertainty and the inability to count on the Americans with respect to this important economic relationship has led us to make other decisions. And, you know, pulling away from that reliance, I think, has always been a good idea. Canada is fortunate in the sense that we have other countries, other major trading blocs like the European Union, the Asia Pacific, and free trade with those regions. And so we need to exercise those options. We also need to be, let's be clear, we need to get oil and gas into the world market, our minerals, critical minerals, our ag sector resources. All of this is there for Canada to take full advantage of. and to wean ourselves off the over-reliance on the U.S. market. We've talked about it for years, just like getting rid of interprovincial trade barriers. We just now have to pull the trigger and take action.
I mean, some research from the Federal Reserve in the U.S. indicates that 90% of the tariff burden has fallen on U.S. consumers. And then the administration lashed back at that report, saying that people should be disciplined for daring to come out with research like that. But it's interesting how Trump seems to have got away with it. I mean, he says, well, I'm interested in cutting the cost of living, but his tariffs have been paid for by the U.S. people.
Well, that's exactly right. The U.S. people, companies, startups, small businesses, and it's facts, not feelings, that matter in this discussion. And yet the president, there's no question, has reaped the reward in terms of billions of dollars. Some estimate as high as $150, $170 billion that have been collected on tariffs. But that is also potentially coming out of the American economy. And now that it'll have to be presumably paid back to some extent, this is also going to create a massive challenge, perhaps legally and otherwise, a bit like unscrambling an egg, Andrew. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing still more uncertainty, more bluster coming from the president. Canada, on the other hand, has to steady itself and look to other markets, while at the same time looking to resolve the outstanding issues around the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement.
Of course, you come from the Conservative side, but how do you, I mean, it's a broad question, but how do you think Ottawa has handled this tariff challenge, this unprecedented tariff war that's been launched by Trump?
Well, it's a very fine line, to perhaps use the expression threading a needle in a haystorm is very difficult. And yet there have been not necessarily missteps, but there has been political nuance and perhaps some risk in provoking the president, and some may disagree with me. The speech in Davos, the position on Palestine, seemingly looking to China and other countries in the wake of this turmoil in the United States. And even, as you mentioned, signaling very openly that we're going to look elsewhere in terms of our defense agreements and defense partnering, perhaps, on new equipment that Canada badly needs. While at the same time we have, been so interwoven with the U.S. security apparatus through NORAD and NATO, talk of a Golden Dome missile defense and F-35s, this is still very much up in the air, but all of which could be seen as provocation or something that has certainly aggravated Donald J. Trump.
It's tricky, as you say. Peter, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure, Andrew. All the best.
Peter Mackay, strategic advisor at Deloitte Canada and also a former Conservative Foreign Affairs and Defence Minister, among other jobs in the Cabinet and elsewhere.